Let's talk now about some of your games. And everyone knows you obviously from the video game industry. Now we know some of the roots of your thinking and how you grew up. But you were in a much different spot when you were graduating from college. You said, I mean, there weren't video game design programs and things like that when you graduated. So how did you get this idea of getting into video games and transitioning from writing stories and doing movies to making games?
So, at the time when I was at the university, I was very focused on making movies. But then I ran into this thing called the Famicom, and experienced Super Mario Brothers and Xavius and this other type of detective game called Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, which is kind of an adventure type game. And they really inspired me and made me feel the great potential that this new medium had. So of course, that was over 25 years ago back then. So games were still very primitive and power was very limited. You couldn't express as much as you can today. But by looking at these games, I felt the great potential in the medium. And the fact that they were interactive really appealed to me. They were digital, they were interactive, there's something new. And it's a personal policy of mine that I always love to try new things, and I want to try to do something that nobody's ever done before. And as an unexplored medium, that really appealed to me, and that's what attracted me to the industry.
Now, you obviously played those games. They inspired you to get into gaming, but you had to think about what types of games that you wanted to make. And Metal Gear obviously is your signature franchise that really you've been working on for many decades now. Metal Gear has a theme to it, and it's an appropriate theme. The idea of nuclear proliferation. And that's something I think that is a theme that's kind of been running through all your games. Why was it important for you to have a message to your games, and why did you pick that issue?
And so I think I've talked about this before, but both of my parents were born in the 1930s, so they experienced World War II, and they lived through the bombing of Tokyo and all of that, and I heard many horrible stories about the war. So I guess you could say, in a way, I inherited those memes from my parents and tried to pass that along through the Metal Gear Solid series. And so what I wanted to do is, at the time, what I saw in games were that they were just kind of there as a way to kill time. It's just kind of this subculture where people just kind of played it for entertainment, which isn't bad. But what I wanted to do is add something more to it, add some meaning to it, and add some message to the story. And so that's what I've always strived for in all my games, in Metal Gear and the other series that I've worked on, is try to have some sort of meaning so that the player can come away from the game with their life enriched somehow.
Now, you've worked in the game industry for a long time, and when I think you first joined Konami, you joined a team that made a game. And I think one thing that's always interesting to me, about game designers is what is the process they go through of building a game. And I think a lot of people, think of the auteur theory for film and say, oh, it's one person's vision that is, what you see on the screen. And you're one of, I think, the few name game designers where a Hideo Kojima game means something. But I wanted to ask you sort of your perspective on game design. Do you think a game really is the vision of one person, or do you think it really is a team that has to create a game? Because now there are a lot of studios that we love, not necessarily a specific individual designer.
So I think you are correct in saying that I am quite rare in the fact that I like to do everything on my games. So not only do I come up with the concept, I do all the planning, I brainstorm, come up with the plot, the system design, the scenarios, the maps. Work on the tweaking. I produce the game. I touch on just about everything that goes on within the game. And so, in that regard, I guess I'm, a rare breed these days. But to me, that's true game design. And that the games that I put that label on that says a Hideo Kojima game, the only games that bear that mark are the games that I'm able to achieve all of these, that I'm able to touch on all these points on, basically. So, of course, the game designer is a creator, but at the same time, you're providing a service to the player. So in that way, I think there are some parallels to, say, a master chef at a restaurant. The chef works with the staff. He chooses all the ingredients, decides how it's going to be prepared, what kind of seasoning is going to go into the dish, how to lay it out, present it to the customers. And so in that sense, I suppose you could say the game creator, like the master chef, is the auteur and is kind of the author of the game, in my opinion. So, for example, going back to that chef parallel again, if you go to a restaurant after, say, the master chef has changed, you may notice that the menu may be different. The flavor of the food may not be what you remembered. Even the service may be different from what you remember. So the experience could be totally different. And I believe it's the same thing with game designers. They're the ones who have to lead the project. And if they change, the entire experience could be affected.
Now, you meet a lot of budding game designers. I mean, many people here, I'm sure, would love to design their own big video game. And even when I've visited your studio, it's interesting to see the designers there who will fill out their idea notebooks and give them to you to, suggest ideas, and you'd review them. And much like a professor, I think, look at their ideas. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you think is the difference between a good game designer and a great one? I mean, you've worked with a lot of people over the years. What is that special alchemy that it takes to be a fantastic game designer?
That's a very difficult question. I think what it boils down to is that as a creator, you really want to create something new. You want to realize your vision. But since games are interactive, that's not enough. You can't just think about what you want to do or what you want to create. You always have to be thinking of the player, because they're the ones who have to interact with your game. So you have something that you want to create, but you also have to think of things from the player's perspective and think about what they want to play. So if we're maybe to talk about cars, for example, if you made a really awesome, sleek-looking car, but it had bad fuel mileage and didn't handle very well, it wouldn't mean much. So I think what you have to do is first come up with something that you like, that you're satisfied with, and then show it to as many people as you can, get their opinions, and really tweak it. I think that's very important.
Now, another thing that I wanted to ask you about was you have a partner in crime, for lack of a better term, on Metal Gear, who's Shinkawa, and his designs have been a very important part, I think, of the Metal Gear Solid games. Tell me about that collaboration, because you talked about, well, I have a Hideo Kojima game, but it seems like Shinkawa is very involved in a lot of your projects.
And so, I am basically a very individual type of person. I approach games like an indie movie. Previously, you saw the Snatcher design docs up on the screen. I actually wrote all those and did all the scripting and everything myself as well. And inside, I still have that feeling. I want to do everything by myself, but at the same time, it's not really possible to do it these days, right? But that said, I still want to do as much as I can by myself. So I'm the type of person that most directors hate, honestly. But when I work with Shinkawa-san, it's a little bit different. I don't feel the limitations. In fact, there's a certain synergy that happens there, and I find that by exposing myself to his ideas and his sensibilities, that we're able to come up with some really cool, unique things. And really, Shinkawa-san's the only person I've ever had that feeling, had that experience with, and I just love working with him.
Now, one question I'll ask you, which I've asked you before, and I'm not sure you've always given me an honest answer, but I'm going to ask you this time, is whenever you do a Metal Gear Solid game, people always ask you, it's like, oh, what's the next one going to be? And you're like, I don't know. It's like, I think I might be done with Metal Gear Solid. It's, I'm going to have to pass it off to some other producer. And it's like, and then, a couple years later, everybody's like, wow, look, Mr. Kojima's doing another Metal Gear Solid game. Are you ever going to stop, do you think?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that as long as there are fans who want Metal Gear Solid, as a producer, I will always want to still make them, and I want the series to continue. So even after I die, I still would love to have the Metal Gear Solid series continue. But, as a creator, of course, I want to do something new, and I don't want to be limited to Metal Gear forever, right? So, of course, I have tried in the past. I've tried to hand Metal Gear off to other people within the studio, and I've tried to raise people up so that they have the ability to take over. And I think since Metal Gear Solid 3, I've tried this and actually did hand it off and have other people come up with the story and come up with the game design. But for some reason, it just never really works out. And, I end up having to step in again to take charge and kind of fix things here and there and just get sucked back in, unfortunately. So then after Metal Gear Solid 4, I started to really seriously think about this again. Okay, how can I escape? So then that's when I thought, oh, wait, maybe if it's a spin-off, then maybe, there'll be a little bit more flexibility and I could leave that to some younger staff. So that's where Rising came into the picture, and I'm really trying to be hands-off with that and leaving that to the new team. But of course, I also want to take the numbered series, the official, canon Metal Gear, and also hand that off to someone. So, I don't know, anybody in the auditorium? Are there any takers? Anybody interested?
This was a recruiting session?
Not many people, actually.
I thought it was an interview.
So, about a couple of hands. Anybody want to make Call of Duty, maybe?